asleep amidst the trees. Bats all are swaying in the breeze. But when the soul lies anxious, wide awake, fearing all manner of ghouls, hags and wraiths. For your dolly Polly sleep has flown, don't dare let her tremble alone. For the witcher, heartless cold, paid in coin of gold. He comes, he'll go, leave naught behind but heartache and woe. Deep, deep woe. It's all silent for the night. Hours turned in as daylight dies. But when so light lunches wide awake, fearing all manner of ghouls, hags and wraiths, my dear dog.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Haunted Connections show. I hope you're all having a good day. So we're bringing this to you from the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley, Leicester, and of course we're sponsored by Sims Vintage Antiques in Warren near Stratford. So welcome everybody to the show. As you can see, it's me and Neil as usual, and of course we've got a lovely guest tonight, which is Cal Cooper. Big welcome to you, Cal.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, for anybody who doesn't know, Cal, would you like to tell us what you do, where you're from, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a senior lecturer in psychology at the University of Northampton. That's where I work. So I live in Nottingham. So I commute all the way down. I go past you guys and go away on the way down the M1. I've got responsibility for various things at the university. I lecture on positive psychology, so how you can use positive and negative emotions to your advantage by understanding them more and how they work. Thanatology, so death, dying, and bereavement. Sexual behavior as well within social psychology, and most importantly, parapsychology. I lead the third year optional module in the psychology curriculum, and we have about 60 or so students each year that take that on, and some of them even decide to do a dissertation based on some topic of parapsychology. And then we also accept research degree students as well, so anything from an MPhil to a PhD or Doctor of Professional Practice, they could take up some aspect of parapsychology as well if they wanted to, really. So that's what I do. I do a lot of media outreach with that as well for the university. So some people know me because of radio shows and some TV with that as well. And I've authored books related to it as well on a variety of things, from telephone calls from the dead through to unusual sounds in haunted locations, understanding the physics and psychology of that with Steve Parsons, and archival research on a psychic called Dr. Alex Tannis, or Professor Psychic Dr. Alex Tannis. And most recently did a forward for a book called Psy Wars, which was about exposing banned TED Talks, problems with Wikipedia entries, especially regarding parapsychology, and things like the James Randi Prize as well.
Wow, you sound like a very busy guy.
Oh yes, I'm surrounded by books at the moment. I mean, this is oops, I don't know where that's gone. Just some of the home library.
Wow.
I was just about to say your background looks very impressive.
Yeah, you've got nearly as many books as me.
Well, it's these ones in blue here. We've got the Skeptical Inquirer, and then over in green we've got the Proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research. Some older ones here on spiritualism and life after death, and then we've got the Journal of
Fantastic.
Parapsychology over there, Fate magazine, you name it. There's loads of different runs of different things around here.
Wow,
Cool.
wow. Very busy and very intelligent man then. I'm going to watch what I'm saying tonight. Okay, Cal, what got you into it? Are you been interested in the paranormal all your life, or is it just come on?
I wonder if I've got that book still to hand, actually. Oh, it's just there. That's actually a bonus, because I was just writing something related to it. So I can show you that.
Okay.
It was, I'd always had an interest in performing arts. That was the thing that I always wanted to do and get involved in. But long story short, later on when I was getting to college and people were being rushed into making their decisions for university and what do you want to do, I saw, just at the college that I was at alone, just thousands every year of people doing music, dance, theatre studies, drama, filmmaking, you name it. They were going down that route because people wanted to be involved in that industry. My love, first and foremost, was for the stage and theatre. I love going to the theatre, and I love being in an old theatre and just the look of it, the feel of it, and that experience that you have when someone's doing a traditional performance. I mean, one of the last ones I saw in Nottingham was with Phil Daniels, and it was the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That was really, really cool. And then when I've been to London, I've seen The Woman in Black and things like that. I love it, love it, love it, love it. But I just thought, and I suppose with discussion with my tutors and my parents at the time, that's not the way to necessarily get what you want out of it, because it's sometimes about networking and having the right agent who also finds the right jobs and puts them in your direction. I've learned over time that the way to get things is to network, and if you know people, it gets you places, and everyone starts a whole back scratching exercise. That's the way the world works best for most people. It's not about what certificate you do or don't have. Other things need to go hand in hand with it. So I took on a psychology degree, knowing that I could potentially use that for various ways, and job interviews, having something like that would be a good grounding, and then work on the other things as well. But I realized that in taking on a psychology degree, I could go to a university that supports parapsychology. So at the time, even though Edinburgh is still quite big, I didn't choose or look at Edinburgh, but I went as far up as Liverpool Hope University, that at the time had just seen people there such as Dr. Matthew Smith, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, Dr. Christine Simmons-Moore, Dr. Nicola Holt, but they'd all gone off. They'd started to go off on their own route. There was also Dr. Diane Dutton and Dr. Carl Williams, so they got quite a big unit there. Dr. Louis Saville was there for a while. Then I'd looked at Hertfordshire University, Professor Richard Wiseman, but spends a lot of his time up in Edinburgh. Coventry University, they were doing a master's in parapsychology at the time that ran for about 6 or 7 years. But Northampton was where I settled for. They got a big research unit there, and we still have to this day. I just ended up staying there. I went there to do psychology. I could embrace parapsychology as well. And I stuck with it after that. I stayed on and ended up going to all the universities after that, but then came back to Northampton and ended up working there. But what got me interested, why parapsychology within that? Because during schooling, I wasn't really big up on school. Believe it or not, I hated books. I really wasn't interested in reading at all. But then discovered that because of my grandmother, who took me to Newstead Abbey quite a lot, which is only about 10 minutes down the road from me, the story of Lord Byron, his dog Bosun, the Newfoundland dog. You've probably heard a lot of this from Barry as well. With Newstead Abbey, the White Lady, the Black Friar. We used to go there for picnics regularly. Even my grandmother requested when she died that she was scattered there. And I kept her in the house for about 4 or 5 years, and I've only just recently scattered her where she wanted to be there. So there's a lot of people together there. But that always interested me, hearing about those experiences. Really? Someone's had this with, seeing an apparition at a bus stop, and they stopped, opened the doors, and this white lady's disappeared, and other things like that. So I would go to the library once a week with school. We'd walk down the road to Sutton in Ashfield Library, and there was a small section that had books on Fortean phenomena, so your Bigfoot and your UFOs and your Loch Ness Monster. But then there were some within there, such as I think the Osborne Book of Ghosts was in there, and a few others that mention things like Harry Price, the ghost hunter of the 1920s and 30s. And there were discussions there of Borley Rectory and things like that, which was at the time considered the most haunted house in England. And I thought these were fascinating, even through to his investigation of Jeff the Talking Mongoose on the Isle of Man. And again, I still thought, well, this is great. And my friends were interested. One of my friends who used to read with me, he went off and became a doctor of high energy physics. He's at the University of Lancaster now. So it's weird that the two kind of biggest geeks for the paranormal at the time went off and pursued science, but clearly one went psychology, one went physics.
Yeah.
But one of the books that I did read was this, and she did 3 of these. These were by Jane Peters, and she was a local author around here. And, you know, they're so basic. It's like an A4 sheet of paper that's been laminated with all these nice pen drawings that people have done. And all she did was go around and collect stories, usually first-hand account from witnesses about various places, and then just detail them. And there'd be a sketch of the locations or things that happened there. And it was good as a series that was out at the time called Ghost Hunters, which was no more than the camera panning around the street, panning around the building of where something happened, and they'd interview all the witnesses, maybe with a little bit of backlighting. It'd be talking heads, and then sometimes they'd interview psychical researchers, including people like Professor Archie Roy. And it was great. There was no running about in the dark with video cameras and night vision and stuff like that, stuff that takes it completely away from what these actual investigations are all about and how they're conducted. They're not conducted like that. So first and foremost, we interview witnesses or we collect survey data. And that's what these programs, these books are about. First-hand witness, okay, how did it happen? What happened? And I find that the most compelling. So I suppose that's ultimately what made me stick with psychology, in order to think, you know what, I want to be involved in this, even though it's a small field and there's not many of us worldwide. I suppose it's where my passion lies. It's a big puzzle of life to unfold, really. And if I wasn't doing that, I'd still be sticking with the performing arts. But I get the best of both worlds, because I get to do this. I go and speak to public audiences. I speak to a lot of universities worldwide. And so I still get my platform. And like Steve Irwin, in a way, I get to show off that passion, and hopefully it goes into the audience in the same way. They just feel that kind of passion kind of seeping through.
Yeah, definitely. I need to get you talking to my son. My son is going to start at Guildford University in January doing performing arts. That's what he's always wanted to do, be on stage, and that's what he's done throughout his life. He's just done a degree in media and film studies. So in January he starts his MA in musical theatre.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Well, good luck to him. I wish him all the best. I mean, I'd love to speak to him sometime. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I'll put you in touch with him. It's just we had a bit of a shock, because they've been flat hunting down Guildford this week, and that was a bit of a shock with the prices.
Yes. Yeah, I can imagine.
It's not cheap down there. But
no, you're better looking for a corridor to stay in.
That's what I said to him. Take a tent and just hung it in someone's back garden. But it's all sorted. So yeah, the passion that you've got is so obvious to anyone watching you. So do you actually go on these investigations with different teams, or?
No, I mean, when I started out, it was going along to some public events, but I suppose I was more so the outsider. I was someone that, again, from the psychology perspective, I wanted to watch the experience. I even had one colleague who's now at Robert Gordon University, whose PhD focused on looking at the public side of things, such as ghost walks and these groups getting together and observing the dynamics of how they work. I was speaking to Steve Parsons last night on the West Files radio show, and we were talking about the separation between parapsychology and this public domain that I hardly know anything about. I see it on social media. I see the arguments that take place as well on social media between these groups. But I find that sometimes when I approach these groups, there is a sort of oh, and then everyone's stands up straight and shoulders back when they realize that I'm involved in parapsychology, because it's just so rare to encounter a parapsychology doing anything to do with haunting investigations and ghosts. Most of them will be found on the university campus or in the labs or out interviewing people that probably has nothing to do with ghosts. So you could probably count on the fingers of one hand, and maybe a couple of extra fingers, those parapsychologists that do go out. To name a few, that'd be myself. I would go out. Steve Parsons, who you've probably heard of, Anne Winspur, Kieran O'Keefe, Lloyd Auerbach, Simon Sherwood, and then I'm hard pushed to think of anyone beyond that, really. So there's very few nowadays, and beyond that, there were, I suppose, people that wouldn't be termed as parapsychologists, but certainly psychical researchers, where they have degrees in other disciplines, they have day-to-day jobs perhaps, but they've been long-time members of the Society for Psychical Research. So Maurice Grosse, Guy Lyon Playfair, and people like that, they had other things to do day-to-day, but they committed themselves to psychical research. So they were still well-skilled and disciplined in using structured methodology and systems of collecting data and looking for fraud and error and things like that. I mean, Guy was a brilliant person to know. I knew him really well, and he really didn't suffer fools gladly. And when you spoke to him in person, he said things as he thought they were. And so the amount of times I'd read things that, you know, Guy was just so easily duped by what went on at Enfield, I just don't see any evidence coming forward for that. When people say that, I think, well, what's your evidence for that? Well, the girls were clearly doing it. Well, yeah, they noted they were. It's in his book, which is only a third of the report. Other times, though, the girls weren't near things that happened. That's what they're questioning. Or even when the family were sent away for 2 weeks and both Guy and he stayed in the house, things continued to happen. So why did that happen? So that there were other things to the mystery. But back to your point, I haven't been out with these groups, and the main thing that I question is, what are they doing and what are they getting out of it? Because I never read or see of any of these reports. So I find it odd when these groups call it that they're having an investigation. Investigation usually means you go out and collect data and then produce a report or some sort of summary. So you could call it ghost hunting, I guess, and more of a hobby thing. But investigation for me, I don't see it as that, just because people that do that, even the psychical researchers, the people that had day-to-day jobs, when they were involved with the SPR, you can look back through the journal history. If people went out to investigate a haunted house, they'd write up the report and they'd submit it to the journal. I don't see any of these coming through, and I don't recognize any of these names.
We'll just put a first comment up from this is from
go for it.
One of our regulars, Sarah. Sarah says, so looking at the psychological aspect of investigating the paranormal, what do you think is it that drives people to keep delving into the subject to find out more?
Oh God, there could be a number of things, and it also could be a number of things that might create people to potentially have an experience if indeed there's only conventional things going on. So it could be because of your background, something that you're like. For me, my grandmother got me interested in ghosts, and what your parents have said. It could be books that you read. It could be due to your religious upbringing and certain things within that you wanted to explore your faith further on a deeper level, or even be told certain things where you've got to avoid it. What else could there be? Well, there could be all those kinds of things, really. And we love a mystery as well. I think even though people are scared by things that they don't know, and there's that kind of resistance towards things that we don't fully understand, some people are drawn towards it, where you like a good mystery. That's why we have TV shows and books that are all about unraveling the truth behind things. And that's what science is all about. It's not just psychology and parapsychology. Everyone of every field of science needs to be a skeptic and go in saying, right, I've heard of the concept, I've heard what it is here that I need to look into, show me the evidence, and let's see that evidence can be presented in a good way. And when you've got all that evidence in, what have you actually got left? Where is it leaning in favour towards, given the fact that you've put in as many controls as you can to make sure that nothing that you know of conventionally is going on? And so I think that's what drives people forward. It's that mystery, and it can be based on a number of things from your own background as well that you might want to explore further.
You got a question, Jane?
Yeah. So have you had sort of a real paranormal experience that possibly you couldn't explain, that has then perhaps put you in a bit of conflict because you sort of say, well, my eyes are seeing that, but my brain is telling me that that can't possibly be because it doesn't fit in with science that I know. So have you had any sort of conflict like that where you've actually seen something but you can't explain it, and yet it conflicts with sort of your science that you've learned?
It didn't really, I mean, there are a couple of things. It didn't really conflict, but it sort of confirmed what I'd read, but I'd never encountered to that point. So you read it and think, oh, okay, I'll take that with a pinch of salt. And I was back there only the other day. When I first started going to haunted locations, the first place that I really went to was Pleasey Vale Mills, besides the Newstead Abbey stuff. And it was weird going back there the other day because now the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies has just gained their new office space in there. So it's really weird that there's this library and office set up for this church sector that deals with psychical research, and it's got psychical research literature in its library in the very building where I was initially doing this. But when it all became quite derelict and the office space wasn't really being used around about 2005, 6, something like that, I got in with some police officers that were interested in some of the things going on there. Even stuff that people question as potential break-in activity, because it's quite remote where it is. It's literally within this vale. And we were in one of the rooms that housed all the old looms that would have been going back and forth to make all these sheets of fabric, and the ceilings were really high with lots of pillars in there, and the windows ridiculously high with only about 3 foot of brickwork at the bottom before they get to the floor. All these spotlights coming in from outdoors, so it didn't really matter what time of the night it was. The room was fully lit by these floodlights. You just got all these various kind of shadowing effects going on. I think some bits of rubble had just been thrown out. We got these cameras locked off various points of the building, and we're just spending the night just wandering from room to room, really. And just in there having a chat, we're just picking up bits of stuff that we're finding on the floor and throwing it out. And then at one point, we heard this bang on the other side of the room, and some rubble came all the way back. We thought, oh, that's odd, and picked up, and it was warm. And it's the same stuff that, you know, we'd been casually picking up, not long enough in your hand to actually warm it up, as though you're just doing this constantly, and then finally you decide to throw it. All bits of rubble that were found would just, you know, pick it up, throw it, pick it up, throw it. That this was hot, and that I found really weird. Kind of, we all looked at it roll. It rolled up to our feet, and we just all looked up and looked at each other directly. And it was one of those heart-sinking moments. But I was thinking, oh, that's quite cool, but also quite unnerving. You know, that's what we've read about before. And maybe a few instances where I certainly remember one at Clifton Hall. We'd set up some trigger objects and drawn around an old penny and a whistle. And when we came back, I was always the first one in a room and the last one to leave. Went back in, and the penny had moved a good centimetre outside of the circle, and the whistle hadn't. The penny was heavier than the whistle. And it was on the top floor in this building that's nowhere near the main road. It's on the edge of the village in the Clifton estate. So that, for me, even though someone will think it's only a penny that was drawn with a circle around it, it's the fact that it moved, though. Things like that shouldn't. It's moved somehow. And if we're looking at structural vibrations or things like that, I'd expect the whistle to move. So it's one of those things that, as Professor Chris French says, you know, I take and I put inside a box and I shut the lid and I put a question mark over it. It's that kind of stuff. I heard when Chris was saying that the other day, well, not the other day, he said it in a lecture a while ago, his kind of favorite one that he put in a box was more of a precognition instance where a guy said that he dreamt of the future. And what he did was, after he dreamt it, he'd then paint it, and he'd go to his bank in town where outside it got a display of the date and the time that was constantly going for all the public to see. So if you're in town shopping, you could look to that and it's an accurate display of the date and time. So he'd go and have his picture taken with these paintings as his own record, like when some people buy a newspaper and stand with it to prove that it's today's newspaper. He was doing that. And he dreamt of 9/11 and the World Trade Centers being hit by planes, and his painting is very distinctly of the World Trade Centers and the planes hitting. And it was 5 years to the day, 9th of September, 5 years beforehand, and he's there. And so that, for him, he found quite eerie, the fact that it was 5 years to the day beforehand. Sorry, 11th of September. What am I talking about? 9th of September. September the 11th. The 11th of September.
That's because the Americans do it the other way around.
I was thinking, right, say it the right way around. Don't say it's 9/11. Say it the British way.
It's very confusing, isn't it? I must admit, Jane and I have investigated with Kieran O'Keefe once at Bosworth Hall, which is a fantastic hall not far.
We've worked with him twice, haven't we?
I don't know. I thought it was just once. Anyway, we've investigated with Kieran O'Keefe, and I found that fascinating because it was a totally different way of investigating for everyone that was there.
And look straight, shoulders back.
Yeah, but it's got to say, Kieran's nice.
Show him off. That's it.
I got on well. We got on well with him, but it was just a totally different way of investigating because of his brain was working different to everyone else that was there.
Yeah.
So is that how you sort of would investigate?
I think if you wanted a night out of entertainment, you'd find investigating with me in the way that I'd want to do it quite boring. And I would just be more interested in setting up a bit of a base and CCTV cameras day and night. I mean, Clifton Hall, I spent 2 years there.
Yeah.
This wasn't an overnight thing. This was take your sandwich box. I'm going there from 7 in the morning. I'll be leaving at 3 in the afternoon. I haven't even seen the darkness. I've been there trying to live with the building
Yeah.
as the people that reported these experiences, who very rarely ever reported anything at night.
Yeah.
And even if they did, they believe it or not, they got electric light, so they turned the lights on. They didn't want to run in the dark. So I do it a completely different way. Even when we did with Steve and Winsper, we were doing a documentary for a Japanese film crew at Margam Castle. That's how things were done. Anne had got CCTV set up. She was at this kind of base where she just watched that. At least I remember she got CCTV. I could be completely wrong on that, but oh no, she got a laptop set up. That's what it was. She wasn't really watching what we were doing, but we took our what we called tweets. Every 10 minutes or so, write down how you're feeling and where you are, what part of the building you're at. And then we'd take these notes back to her after every hour, and then she'd just write them all up immediately into a Word document to document everyone's experiences over periods of time. But we'd just routinely do that. It was a constant note-taking and gathering exercise. And when we got to whichever room we're meant to be in, we might be there with one other person. We'd chat a little bit, but then now and then we'd say tweet, something like that, and then just stop interacting with that other person, just have a bit of a thinking moment, have a wander around maybe that room. But that's about it. No, I mean, I've got stuff here. I mean, rarely is it used unless you're just trying to look for things and learn about the building. Thermal image cameras, things like that, your EMF meters. But you won't see me wandering about specifically, just constantly doing this. That's not really going to happen. And that's more so something that I'd leave to Steve, someone that's engaged with physics. I'm a psychologist, so I get the basic premise behind why we use these, but having it in my hands constantly isn't really going to do much, and I'm not going to achieve much by it. But learning more about the human experience, I am. So I think from what I've seen, a lot of even Facebook lives of people doing investigations, and I honestly don't understand what it is they're doing beyond getting some sort of personal buzz out of what it is they're doing, where I'm not seeing the end result of it ultimately. Going back to the founders of people doing these kinds of things, where they said, right, there's the claim, this place is allegedly haunted, let's go and get some information about it, and then start a debate amongst our peers to really get to the bottom of this. And it was all about being critical of each other's experiences, the investigation method, and that's how you work forward. Take the very basic premise of observation and documentation, and then try and look at common themes, patterns, understand the processes more.
You were going to say something, Jane?
Yeah. So do you believe there is life after death? Because it has been, it's sort of proven that energy does not die, and when we sort of die, our spirit, our soul, that energy continues on in a different form. So we lose our physical body. So do you believe that energy carries on, that there is life after death?
I think if I believed in life after death, or if I believed in telepathy, then I wouldn't bother doing what I'm doing. But at the same time, if I said outright, I don't think there is such thing as telepathy, and I don't think there is such thing as life after death, I wouldn't do it either. I've already gone in either case with my mindset made up, and that's a personal issue. That's not a scientific issue. Even scientists that follow Christian faith or any other faith, when they enter the lab, they have to leave that faith at the door and then step into being a scientist and being skeptical. Again, know your literature, know your subject, and make sure you're applying good methods, and see what's left afterwards. What you personally believe doesn't count for diddly squat. And so when it comes to life after death, I love the old literature. I'm on the survival research committee for the Society for Psychical Research. Starting with ghosts and hauntings, that was the premise that always interested me. So I've seen a lot of evidence that's to some extent persuasive of the idea of life after death. But I've never seen anything that's kind of, a singular good concrete case where you think, I cannot think of any possible alternative that's leaking in there. Even a good case of survival, people have said, well, even if we're then to accept the idea of ESP, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, or psychokinesis, movement and manipulation of people or objects with the mind, those two elements could potentially be making up the illusion of survival, because of your ability to reach out and gather information and project it as a hallucination via clairvoyance and telepathy, perhaps. That apparition is actually a construct of the mind applying psychical phenomena. That's if we're going the real extreme end of the scale, and therefore it's ruling out any premise of the mind surviving after death. So once you're dead, that's it. The mind has also gone with the body as well. So it's called the super ESP hypothesis, where people have applied that and said, look, super ESP could apply for all cases of survival if you want to really think it through, where you're obtaining this information or you're creating this hallucination that gives you the illusion of interacting with the deceased or gaining information from them. But even then, there are some survival cases that are very hard to kind of think of, well, how does ESP and PK creep through there? But still, there are some good ones. They remain in the literature, and some good ones still crop up now and then. So they're not completely ruled out. No one can sweep the idea of survival completely under the carpet and never to be lifted and dealt with again.
So as a complete skeptic then, and sort of saying that you think a lot of these things are perhaps hallucinations, or that they're sort of created in people's minds, do you think that as a skeptic you're closing your mind off so much and you're not open-minded to perhaps accept that there may be something out there, so that you may sort of look at the evidence in a different way?
Well, that I'm not that kind of person, though. That would be a cynic. And that's the person that's dismissing it. I'm open to the idea, so it's got to present itself in a suitable fashion. When it comes to survival cases, I'm not going to see those in the lab. That's going to be someone that can come with their experience and can add whatever elements they want to it. It's still got to be a case where I then follow up and the person's willing to answer further questions I may have, so we can get to the bottom of the experience. That's the problem with these kinds of experiences. Most people will come to me at events and other things and say, I had this ghost experience, explain this. Before you've even told me what it is, I can't explain it. I wasn't there. But you could tell me all the elements of it, and I could start to work our way towards the bottom of what it was, really. But the open-mindedness towards it, the fact that I'm here discussing this right now with you and I do the job that I do, shows that I am open-minded enough to actually want to help science and indeed the general population understand these experiences more. So I'm as open-minded as any scientist can be, applying skepticism in the right way with that healthy dose of let's look at the fors, let's look at the against. Anyone that's saying from the outright, I don't believe in life after death, prove me otherwise, that could be going too far. And if they're just blocking everything and don't want to read the evidence for it and say I don't need to read that, I know what's going on, well, that's just pure cynicism. And it's shocking if people are operating as scientists with that kind of mindset. Unfortunately, there are some people like that. But that's where too much of their own personal life and personality have crept in. It's starting to get a very emotional stance. If you've ever seen it, there's a thing called Graham's hierarchy of argument. And it shows you all the levels people could have for creating an argument. And some of it you can see reflected on social media, where the bottom line is name calling, picking people up on typographical errors when they reply, and mocking, things like that. And then there comes to things such as disagreeing but responding with evidence to the contrary and things like that, that you've got these nice middle ground ones which are where you should be. And then at the top of the pyramid is absolutely refuting the central point. So it doesn't matter what evidence you present to that person, they can say other things. They are not going to draw a line with you and actually reach a balanced scale and come down to the middle of the pyramid. They're going to stay at the top because they've got this seat that they want to be on. They're on their high horse and they're not coming down. It doesn't matter what you throw at them or how you poke them, they're staying up there. Yeah. So that's something to relate to.
Okay, let's put some more.
That's right, carry on.
Let's put some comments up because there's quite a few. Denise, I imagine you must know Denise. Gosh, you're talking about all the conversations we've ever had.
It sounds like it, Nisi. Hello, Nisi.
Sarah says, when I first started researching the paranormal, I used to keep a written journal of every investigation I've done. Think maybe I need to get back to doing that.
No, that's a really good idea. And I'd also say that if you have quite vivid dreams as well, keep a dream diary. They're really important, just like the guy that I mentioned with the paintings. If you're keeping a dream diary and signing and dating it, then if you do believe that you've ever had dreams of future events before they've happened, then you've got that documentation of you signed and dated it. Especially if in the morning, you actually show someone as well that you've written it. Just say, I want to tell you what my dream was last night. And just to show you here, look, I've written it in my notebook. All those things are good, but definitely if you're going along and you're going out and you're doing ghost hunting and things like that, keep a notebook. This is the most basic thing: pens, pencils, and a notebook. Time and date. Just document your experiences. That's the most important thing. That's starting from scratch, but it's the best way to start.
Oh, maybe you'd like to see my book.
I'd love to see your book. If
Jane keeps a book.
Because all the yeah.
Okay, Sarah says, Cal, have you ever researched children and the paranormal? As I feel this is an area that needs looking into more, as children experience more than we do, and they need to be listened to.
I haven't personally, though I've done a few. Not that we use them anymore. We use them as examples, but the got some here somewhere. There they are. Just as a bit of fun with. I was doing it with my stepsons, my youngest stepson actually. We were doing Xenocard stuff several years ago. It was about 5 or 6 at the time, and in one of these runs, you've got your star, your cross, your wavy line, your circle, your square. Got 5 in every pack, 25 to a pack. Your chances of just guesswork are getting 5 out of 25. A standard deviation allows for about 6 out of 25 still at a guess. Once it starts to go over that 7, 8, 9, that's starting to get really interesting. When these started out, they were shuffled up and they introduced screening so no one could ever see what card you were holding up. They were even then put in little brown envelopes. So you, even though this is, and one of the arguments says, oh, well, you can actually see through this. You guys can see because of the lighting what symbol it is. If you hold a flashlight right up to it, you can do. They were really thick card and they actually printed their own ones at Duke University when they did it. But nevertheless, they were shielded from seeing it. My stepson, he got 15 in a row once, and there was no repeated pattern to it. It was completely random. It was a random shuffle, and it was a random sequence that came out. It was only when he was laughing, he was finding it fun, kept going, that one, and then it turned out to be right, and he'd laugh, and then that one. And the moment he was told by his mum, right, concentrate, this will make 16, he stopped laughing and tried to really, and it went, and he didn't get another one. But in terms of studies with children, there are quite a few good ones out there. There's a lot in psychical research history. A lot of stuff was done on school children. John Randall, the biologist and psychical researcher, when he was working at schools in Warwick, he did a lot of in-house studies with the children that he was working with. They're mentioned in his book, Parapsychology, The Nature of Life. It's quite an old one now. Dr. Alex Tannis and Catherine Fair Donnelly, they did a book called Is Your Child Psychic? Came out in 1979. That's a good one. And there's also a book by, it's all the way over there, Cook, called, as in C-O-O-K-E, From the Mouth of Babes. That's a good one on children's ESP. I've even just sorted out a new PhD over there by, I've forgotten his exact surname, but Goran, who's Brucewitz, Goran Brucewitz, who was at the University of Greenwich. He's just done finished his PhD on telepathy and experiences in general in twins and close bonds. And so that happens a lot. Again, more so with children. I've seen some fantastic reincarnation cases as well that are quite outstanding. Again, the Barrow Boy, if you remember that, when that was on TV about the young lad in Scotland who claimed he got another set of parents and was recounting this other life. That was interesting. So the studies are out there. There are loads of them. I'm not involved in child psychology in any way, and I've got so many projects going on. It's not something I'm personally going to look into. But if I had anyone coming along saying they wanted to do a PhD specifically looking at ESP in children or anything else, I'd certainly be really interested in that. I have one student who, for their dissertation, because she was going on to do PGCE and work with primary school children, she initially wanted to look at experiences of the bereaved. And I said, why? Why don't we just do a study where you're interviewing people either on their childhood experiences or about their own children's experiences, and just get to grips with that kind of literature? And she said, well, funnily enough, I've been working in primary schools and I've seen a lot of experiences kids have that are weird. And I said, well, there you go then. Why don't you try and understand that further? And then when you've done that study, take it further, take it with you. So they're out there. There's loads of them. And they're in the literature. There's quite a few things that I can name off the top of my head regarding.
So this whole thing then is a huge subject, isn't it? No, the paranormal, and there's so many people looking into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was mentioning last night, there's technically 3 strands to it. Most people will go into it from a background of psychology, but we've got people involved that are historians, physicists, anthropologists, sociologists, physicists. There's been a lot of eminent physicists involved in the field. I mean, one of the vice presidents of the Society for Psychical Research is Professor Bernard Carr, who is a physicist, and his supervisor was Professor Stephen Hawking. So we've got a lot of people that know their stuff when it comes to physics and psychology, look into any of the psychical research history. you'll see all these people that were in very prestigious positions. Even one of our past prime ministers, Arthur Balfour, was a president of the Society for Psychical Research. He was married to Eleanor Sidgwick, who was the wife of Henry Sidgwick, who was he was the first president of the SPR, scholar in the history of medicine. But parapsychology has, I guess, 3 different domains. You've got parapsychology that tests the claim. It is interested in people's experiences and their emotions and beliefs and what leads to an experience, but also is interested in, well, what about that a little bit more? Is there anything actually left over that we can't explain that we could look into explaining? Then you've got anomalistic psychology. This is more so pushed by Professor Chris French at Goldsmiths University. And that works more so from the premise that you can explain these experiences by what conventional science already knows. But as Chris has found himself from his own career, there are a few things you put in that box with a question mark above it, and they have tested some people's claims. They've done some staring detection studies and telephone telepathy studies down at Goldsmiths. And then I suppose what we also specialize in at the University of Northampton is clinical parapsychology. So regardless of the truth behind the claim, when someone has one of these experiences, they go to see a medium, they have a spontaneous experience day to day of a vision of the future and people dying in some sort of disaster, or through to seeing an apparition in the corner of the room, regardless of where that experience came from, why did you have it and how does it affect you? If it's a natural thing of day to day and it's just something that the brain does, and maybe it doesn't have something to do with psi, what does it do to your health and well-being to engage in these kinds of experiences, to have them and report them? So we look at those health and well-being aspects that overlap with positive psychology, as I mentioned at the start. So there's a load of different branches that you could go down.
It's quite baffling for me, I must admit. I didn't realise there's so much being part of it. You got a question, Jane?
Yeah, so do you think that science will ever sort of catch up with sort of the knowledge about spirituality? Because spirituality has been around for thousands and thousands of years, whereas science has only been around for sort of 300 years. And science is still trying to catch up with trying to prove, if you like, what the spiritual world already knows. So do you think there'll ever be a time when the science will catch up?
I suppose you could argue that science goes back even beyond that, if you want to even go back to ancient philosophers. I mean, philosophy is the very basis of science, and anyone that does a full-on science research degree, it's still labelled the Doctor of Philosophy. So it doesn't matter what discipline of science you're in, you end up with a PhD. So it's all based on, well, where do we actually get this knowledge from, and how well-founded is it? And then how do you get a new claim and you test it? And so that empirical evidence then informs new theory again. So we're constantly dabbling with philosophy and the question of, well, what is knowledge and what is truth? I like your point, though, on spiritualism and will it catch up? I suppose the way that I don't see it as spiritualism or necessarily label it as that, but something that Rupert Sheldrake will probably commonly say is post-materialist ideas, and not boiling everything down to a purely materialist ideology around science. And so there's all these studies within parapsychology that may suggest that mind and brain do act independently of each other because of telepathic experiences, because of the psychokinetic studies, and then because of some of these instances that suggest the mind surviving outside the body or beyond death as well. And overall, they've got a really good success rate. They've got a really good impact when it comes out. Sorry, not effect size when it comes out. When we look at some of these studies as a whole, and they're very comparable to the rest of psychology, in some instances better. And the methods that it developed have now been worked into the rest of social science. So social science has started to catch up with parapsychology, which was using methods of screening to stop sensory leakage, fraud and error. It was looking at blind testing and double blind testing as well, to make sure that, again, there's no way of people knowing the potential outcomes, and other areas have started to use this. And so it might get integrated. I was saying only in the last few days that there's certain things that we've come to know so much about that initially started out in psychical research. It's just bled its way into the rest of science, as it should. If parapsychology does its job right, it won't exist one day, because we've finally understood the mechanisms behind something, and then it goes into cognitive psychology or elsewhere. So mesmerism and hypnotism, for example, there was a whole committee with the SPR on that. There hasn't been for a long time, because we understand hypnotism and suggestibility. So they're now disciplines in of themselves. Dreaming and sleeping research, well, we still don't fully understand dreams, but certainly research on sleep studies, they've taken over as well. There's whole journals on that. And even though parapsychology is interested in dream precognition and that kind of phenomena, it doesn't primarily deal with understanding dreams. Again, that's kind of worked its way out. It's even though it's still got its own anomalies attributed to it, it's worked its way out. I don't think, if part of your question is also saying, will there ever be an acceptance? I don't think there will. But that's not just indicative of parapsychology. I think because the stigmas we attach to some of the wording surrounding parapsychology, ghost, poltergeist, is very dirty words, supernatural, paranormal. Those ones in of themselves are misleading. It's supernatural, it's paranormal. Well, how many people report telepathy day to day? Surveys say 70%. Well, then it's not supernatural, paranormal, it's normal and natural. What is that? Is the minority. So we need to understand why the minority aren't having these experiences as well. That's an interesting side of the statistics. But any discipline you come to, whether you want to deal with science or religion, there will be people that are always going to be against something that you're doing. It's like also just getting celebrity status. As much as people follow you and that's what makes you a celebrity, there are also a good group of people out there that hate you as well. And they will never like what it is that you do. It's just the nature of the beast. It's just the human nature. It's the human way. So what you can do, you can create a good science. You can do things right, have good structured methodology, make sure that you're reporting everything and people understand it. I don't think you should be too caught up on there being a few people that disagree, especially if those people can't explain properly or with good evidence why they don't disagree. The ones that disagree and give you good evidence, they're the ones to listen to and work with.
Okay, let's put the next comment. It's from Sarah again. Sarah says, so do you think there's a link between mental health and the paranormal?
In terms of people with mental health disorders and things like that, there have been some studies on that, personality types and so forth. There were some early studies as well. I was coming across those the other day. I mean, they're very crude to kind of mention those, I guess, but there were the ones where we have that term lunatics and the lunatic asylum, but people were looking at correlations between moon phases. So that's a change in geomagnetic activity, explosions on the sun, and essentially, and what that kind of has in terms of an impact on people, especially people that are in hospital for various mental health problems, and whether that increased rates of their behavior. And so we are infected by a number of environmental things. Whether, though, if you're asking, because it's a very broad question you're asking, are people with autism more likely to report telepathic experiences that seem to be accurate? There might be those studies out there. I've certainly seen them. I've got one colleague that's looking at temporal lobe epilepsy, and that's not a mental disorder in terms of educational difficulties. It's more so the fact that they have a seizure now and then that's very spontaneous, or they've got their own, because they've lived with it, they've got their own way of knowing when one might be coming on. But within that, they have the seizure, they can't control their body, they're having all these various visions, but science doesn't really understand fully why people have temporal lobe epilepsy and why these visions come about, and also why these visions can sometimes be precognitive and relate to future things. So there's a lot of correlations going on. I think a lot more studies could be done in terms of those, but there are also scales on different things like schizophrenic tendencies, so schizotypia as well. To what extent would someone measure on that scale in relation to experiences they report or beliefs they may have as well? So we can look at those kinds of overlaps and relationships that are out there. That would probably be, if I went away and had a look at some of the literature, I could then give you another hour just purely on that. So it's very broad.
Yeah. I've got a question, Cal. I know me and Jane have got our own opinions on demons and demonic possessions. Do you have any opinions on demonic possessions?
Yeah, I don't think it's demons. I just think there's a lot of nasty people. Sometimes it's those that you want to be worried about. Well, I don't think. I think that, again, that goes back to the mesmerism and the suggestibility. If anyone thinks they're possessed by a demon, then you've got to look at their cultural background, their religious beliefs, and also what kinds of things that they've actually interacted with. Even sometimes what they've actually consumed as well.
Yeah.
Is it something that they've actually consumed when it comes to medication or something like that? That's given this kind of alternative personality, something like that. But there are even people day to day that have very kind of distinct kind of mood swings and things like that, borderline personality disorder and various other things like that. I think, again, use that Occam's razor and look for the most conventional explanation that takes the least amount of steps to explain, rather than jumping all the way over that bridge. Well, the bridge isn't even built yet. Jumping all the way over to the other side and saying it's a demon. Well, how about we just look at stuff on the shoreline that we're already familiar with first, because it might very well be one of them. You don't need to go and look at the other side.
That's exactly what we think, but because obviously we run the Antiques Research Centre, and quite often we've had people on a Saturday asking about demons and that sort of thing and possessions, but we sort of answer the same as you.
Well, I haven't met a demon yet, but I've still got an open mind that I'd like to just to prove the theory.
Well, no, I'm open to it. I've certainly seen plenty of films with them in. The Exorcist is ringing to mind again.
Oh, The Exorcist. That's got a lot to answer for, The Exorcist.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Sarah says, thank you. That was so interesting.
Thank you, Sarah. You're asking a lot of questions. I like this.
Sarah always does. He must be our biggest contributor on these shows. Denise said that is what I'm researching at the minute. I can't remember. No, I think that was a reply to something else we were talking about, but we moved quick, really quick, don't we?
Dreams, was it maybe? Something like that?
Possibly. I don't know. I can't remember. You'll have to let us know, Denise. So you got another question, Jane?
Yes. Do you think, or what's your opinion on the fact that we might all be connected as part of a bigger picture? There's been some studies to sort of show that at one point we may all have been connected, and the environment, the energy and everything else, that we're all connected to that as well.
Well, we've certainly all come out of the same melting pot initially, but that's going back millions of years. If indeed we're all connected now, I mean, that then starts to dabble with several theories. One of them is more a biological-based theory that Rupert Sheldrake talks about a lot, which is morphic fields, morphic resonance, in that each generation, as we're alive now, we're through the morphic fields learning about things to help us, which could be seen as potentially psychic phenomena at play, but maybe psychic phenomena is just ultimately this morphic field and this transfer of information that we need. But the idea is that through this transfer of not directly learning from something, we just intuitively know. I'm using intuition again, but still I'm talking about the morphic field. But how does the next generation better itself? One of the examples in one of Rupert's books was, I think it was of some, I've probably got the bird wrong, but let's just say sparrows for the sake of argument. They were noted in some county in the UK for going onto milk bottles and tapping with their beak the foil off the top and drinking the milk so they could get it out. But then it was noted some distance away, many, many miles away, that some other sparrows were copying the same behavior, and yet they'd not interacted with that other flock. So why is it that a short time afterwards, they also instinctively know that that would actually be a beneficial food source? I suppose another example that I like to use, though it's not written into Rupert stuff, but I've always questioned it myself, is I've seen spiders hatch. I've watched spiderlings at work, and even when they're in trees and they've hatched. And I've seen a newborn spider just instantly come out of its egg. When it's microscopic, you have to be stood literally centimeters from your eye to the spiderling to be able to see it in the morning light as it starts to come up. We're talking about 4 or 5 in the morning. Don't ask me why I was watching this. It's a long time ago. But the first thing that it did, it built a web, a perfect web. And it's no bigger than a pinhead. How does it know that it needs to do that for its survival? It instantly does. But I guarantee you, I take that back. I don't guarantee you, but certainly from what I've seen of the evidence and this theory that's been postulated is that spider is going to be better than its mum and dad. And that's mum and dad and the grandparents before and before and before. Each generation is bettering itself. Very much in a Darwinian way to actually make sure that its survival instinct is better. The web is slightly more refined and it's better as it goes along, and all these techniques taken over. So it's not spending time just wandering about before it builds a web. It instantly gets on it and starts its quest of living and surviving. And so the morphic field could be a way that everything is interconnected in a way. Another one could just be purely a psi field, that there's this psi field that is essentially like a morphic field. How do we distinguish one from the other? that is delivering us this information. It's why we see apparitions of dying people or people that just died that we don't know are dying or have died, or why we have telepathic experiences. And so, potentially that could be what's interconnecting us. There was something else that was going to jump into my head then, but it's gone.
So what about
multiverse as well?
Energy? The field of energy. In 1944, Max Planck, the theorist, theoretical physicist, get my words out, suggested that there was a field of energy that existed and connected everything in creation. And then in 1986, E.W. Silvertooth, sponsored by the Air Force, carried out the experiment, and they did actually sort of prove that this field did exist.
Well, I think
this field. I think they originally called it, Max Planck sort of referred to it as the Matrix.
I think prove is a very strong word, and it's one we don't really use in science at all. You can take that back to saying condoms are absolute proof that sexually transmitted infections and birth control, when it comes to that, it can be avoided by using well, no, the 99.9, every company that releases them puts that on, so there's very strong evidence to suggest that they are, but we know that there are experiences where people have used them and they haven't got the desired effect. And so that's how science also operates as well, and they've things like that have been created through scientific discovery as well. What they're describing there, even though I don't like this kind of loose term of energy, is just like what I've said with the morphic fields, a psi field, or something. If we're going into physics, Bernard Carr looks at multiverse theory and hyperspatial models, and that again all around us is this idea of multiple universes, and if we see an apparition of a living person or of a dead person, or have one of these experiences of a telepathic exchange, is it not just as experiencing an overlap of all these potential dimensions? And so there's theories postulated about that, and textbooks as well. This is something where a fairly well established theory has been built on it, but certainly with the morphic fields and the psi fields, there's been a lot of experimental data to try and back up this idea as well. I mean, there are ways of testing morphic resonance, and there are ways of testing a psi field in terms of just a good controlled lab study of ESP and PK as well. And so with Max Planck and that idea, I don't think what they were doing was necessarily needed, given that psi fields and many other things were being talked about before then, in a way. And so I like the concept, and I get the concept, but I can just see it labelled as other things. Is someone got the kettle on us?
Yeah, my wife's just put the kettle on. I do apologise.
Yeah.
It's cup of tea time.
Coffee, Julie.
Okay, the last couple of comments then. Denise says, researching into the paranormal and mental health, religion and jinn. That's what they're researching.
Fantastic.
Sarah says, such a knowledgeable guy. Have you written your own book yet?
Yes, I've got a few books out. There was the first one needs to come out again as an ebook or a Kindle, but the first one that I did was called Telephone Calls from the Dead. And so that's really scarce now. All the copies have gone. They mainly sold to America. It was quite popular there. But I edited a book for the Alex Tannis Foundation called Conversations with Ghosts with Alex Tannis. I co-edited a book with Steve Parsons called Paracoustics. I edited another book for the Tannis Foundation called Psi in Psychotherapy. And then I've just recently done the foreword to Psi Wars with Craig Wheeler. I've got chapters in other books. I mean, if you're interested in just reading stuff that I've done, like this one, Continued Bonds and Bereavement, I have a chapter on there in terms of what would count as evidence for interaction with the dead in the bereavement context. What else have we got?
What would that be then? What would you count as evidence?
You've got to read the chapter to find that out. I'm not telling you. It's a long, I mean, God, it's about 20 pages long. It's kind of setting the groundwork and then me giving examples and stuff like that. But it's there's no sweeping answer. It's the context of the individual account and what it does and doesn't have. Yeah. And so there's that. I've talked about the bereavement experiences. I've got a chapter with colleagues in this book, Death, Dying, and Mysticism. I've got more books on the go as well. I mean, I'm working on more experiences of these after-death communications. I'm trying to work on a biography for D. Scott Rogo, who was a parapsychologist who was murdered in 1990. Trying to work on a biography for Alex Tannis. There's loads of stuff in the pipeline. Too busy.
Is a comment from Sarah for you, Jane. Get reading.
Yeah. I can feel some more books coming on.
All right.
Always good.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time again. It's gone really quick. So it's
Yeah.
9 o'clock. So thanks so much for joining us, Cal. It's been fascinating. I really
Yeah,
do
it's
mean
been
that.
brilliant. It's been, you know, it's so interesting to listen to other people, other points of views, and other people's experiences. So thank you very much for coming on. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's been lovely
Yeah.
meeting you both.
Yes, and yeah. So we're going to say good night now. So that's it from us this week, isn't it?
Yeah, just want to say thank you to everybody in the chat. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for joining us and you know, interacting. It's been great.
Oh, final thing. Don't forget our virtual Parameet coming in this December. It's the last week of December. So if any teams or any individuals fancy coming on for an hour, talking about whatever they want to talk about, that's fine. And that's even open to you, Cal. If you fancy coming on for an hour,
thank you very much. Let me know the times and dates.
Oh yeah, I'll send them to you. That'd be
and
great.
Then, yeah, we'll sort
you can talk about anything. It won't be like this. It'll just be.
Yeah, we won't be interrogating you.
Oh, I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all.
You can talk about anything you'd like, Cal.
Brilliant.
Okay then. So we're going to say goodnight. Thanks so much for watching and all your comments. So we'll see you all again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Was asleep in midst the trees.